Hey everybody. Hello. Welcome to the evening. It's the evening show. It's the 7 p.m. that you know and love. Never late. Can't be late. Well, it's 6:54 p.m. So we're a little bit early, as usual. Got to do our checks. And we have a pretty special show tonight. I think every show is pretty special, but I always love talking to first-time guests, especially when it's somebody that I've been following for a long time. And that is one way to describe Ben Davidson of Space Weather News, Suspicious Observers. So, we're going to have Ben on tonight. We're going to be talking a lot about his work, a lot about his most dire conclusions that he's drawn about what kind of a trajectory we are on with solar cycles of our sun and how it is affecting our Earth and what that means for everything. Okay, we're going to be talking about pole shifts. We're going to be talking about solar cycles and everything in between. NASA, what their involvement in all this stuff is or not involvement. And then we'll get a little more outside the box and talking about the bigger considerations and the very open way that the elite will communicate with each other, public comms as they call them, but also revelation of the method, because this has very end of days kind of feeling, and I just don't know how supernatural Ben Davidson gets with a lot of his analysis. Obviously, you know, the hard sciences are the hard sciences, and then there has to be something inside that stirs and says, is there something more to this, something more, something unseen, especially when you're talking about cataclysm of this type, which that'll be a big part of tonight's show. So hang on. I know that a lot of this might be disturbing to you, to some of you. And many of you may have your own opinions on this that differ from Ben. So I'm hoping that in the second half of the show, with whatever's left, we can get some calls, people, your opinions on what you think, what your research has shown you. I think that'd be pretty fun. But for tonight, I've got so much to talk about with Ben. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no time for calls. But I don't want to keep him too long if he's got something else to do. Anyway, he'll be on with us in just a little bit. So here we are going to do our thing. I want to thank all my sponsors, all my affiliates, all my friends on the affiliates page and quitefrankly.tv. That, of course, is topped off by our wonderful partners for a long time now, BlueMonsterPrep.com. Pat and Gina, they are going to get you and everybody you know and love all ready for 2024 because they can help you prepare for all types of things that you can't expect. You can't really bet on. It can be coming from anywhere. They've got your gas masks. They've got your two-way radios. They got your solar power generators. They got your heirloom seeds, food, water filtration, first aid. Get to BlueMonsterPrep.com. Use promo code Frankly for free shipping. But there's so much more there. Wise Wolf Gold and Silver. I already put in my Christmas order with Tony from Wise Wolf. That's quitefrankly.gold. You've got the official Quite Frankly coffee blend that's there. There's Flip City Magazine, Yes Cacao, Magical Botanical Chocolate. Okay, this stuff is health food, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, they were down at KetoCon with Jay Gulanello. You can't get down there at KetoCon if you're just regular old milk chocolate loaded with sugar and all that crap. This is botanical, my friends. It'll cure your soul. There's Apex water. There's so much more. You have to go check it out. And, of course, there's the Quite Frankly merchandise. And so that's my blanket plug for the evening on this Wednesday night in December. And it's a chilly one, my friends. I was out there cooking my steak and a couple of small baby lamb chops. I don't know. I love baby lamb chops, but almost like with oysters, the first couple of hours after I eat it, I'm holding my breath. I'm saying, did that taste a little bit too gamey? Am I going to start throwing my guts up? So far, so good. I ate it about an hour and a half ago, so I think I'm okay. If I turn green in the middle of this broadcast and I hurl, then you'll know what happened. Tell people it was the lamb. All right. Ashton Forbes is on tomorrow. And we got a lot of other great stuff going on. Oh, Tony Black is going to be coming in on for the first half hour or so on Friday night. He told my mother he wants to come in. I said, okay, I'm going to move some things around, and you guys can come in the first half hour, first 45 minutes, whatever he's comfortable with. So we'll have a good time on Friday night, and next week is going to be just as awesome. So hold on to your butts. All right, here's a little something out of New York City. Our good friend Leroy Press at Viral News NYC. He's continuing to be, some of the lone boots on the ground, showing raw news and views from the ground over there in New York City, and a little bit more on the migrant issue that's going on. This is serious stuff now. I mean, it's always been serious, but now we're talking true humanitarian crisis, because so many of these people are just sleeping out on the streets. They're just sleeping out on the streets now, and it is freezing outside. So you know what's going to start happening. They're going to start finding these foreign nationals just dead all over the city, because there's already no place to put them. The homeless shelters, they're kicking out 94-year-old World War II veterans to put in, or Korean War, I don't know, Frank Tamaro, we were talking about him the other night. They're kicking out veterans to put in foreign nationals inside of nursing homes. And even Leroy said it, the migrants are sleeping on the streets. Some have been out here for days already. The migrants regret coming to New York City. Thank a Democrat. Migrants beg for work authorization from Joe Biden. What is work authorization going to do for you? Do you understand how expensive living is? I mean, that's just, to be able to say, okay, you are authorized to go clean dishes at a local pizzeria. What the hell does that do for your living situation? You're not going to be able to pay New York rent with that. So that's going on. Figured I'd just throw that into the mix because it's a short little something. Then we have this. Donald Trump apparently was on with Sean Hannity the other night, and here's the headlines. Breathless. Donald Trump refuses, all capitals, refuses to rule out being a dictator. I refuse to rule out being a dictator. Tells Sean Hannity he may get revenge on his enemies on day one after dodging a question about abusing the law to go after people. Would you abuse the law to go after people? I don't know, maybe. No, here's the thing. The law has been completely skirted. So if he goes after people, if he throws the book at people, it'll suddenly look like he's abusing power, because he would be prosecuting criminals for the first time in a long, long time. And man, oh man, if there's not, that's like, seriously, that's the sole reason, just to roll the dice to see and just how many people he actually will go after. That's good enough reason for me to throw a vote, because other than that, I don't think that voting for president even matters anymore. But if there's even a slightest of chance, I can see that he's got my vote in 2024. So I guess we'll get into that some other time. Something here. Hold on. To be clear, do you in any way have any plans whatsoever, if reelected, to abuse power? What kind of Sean Hannity actually asked that question? Do you have any intention to abuse power, to break the law, to use government to go after people? His response was, "You mean like they're using right now?" Well, that's good. That's the response, but the way that the Daily Mail covered it, "You mean like they're using right now?" Trump responded without answering the question directly. He just did. That's what they're doing right now. A deviation from that would actually be a restoration of law and order. You see how crazy this is? So, man, I didn't even know the hell that was going on, but then again, it doesn't, I don't know. I'll keep my eyes open for some clips. Here's another one for you. The last one before we go to break and kick this one off for real. AOC, here's the headline. She claims that all underage women will face genital examinations if biological men are barred from female sports. Does she really think that we don't know? Does she honestly think that these broad-shouldered, square-jawed men competing next to women don't stand out like a sore thumb? That we don't know? Does she honestly think that the birth certificates of everybody that is going to college and competing, or just going to college to be educated, that whether they think that they're a boy or a girl, their birth certificate is unchanged? They were born a certain way. That's all you need to know. You don't need to go examine women's genitals. But of course, they have to catastrophize everything. Everything. I mean, baked in, and it's so crazy too, because baked into this bird-brained response that this girl gave is the insinuation that men are totally passable as women and probably have been secretly competing as women for hundreds of years, and we just didn't notice. And now and now girls have to be subjected to medical exams. You know, this is peak 2023, where it's science. This is peak science for 2023, where now we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Neil deGrasse Tyson are essentially intellectual peers now. They are intellectual peers. That's it. I guess it's more of a compliment for her, but still an insult to them both. Because you remember what he was saying about competition? That he said that in the future, all collegiate sports and whatever should not be based on sex, but it should be based on a full battery of exams. She's saying that, there's going to be somebody that's going to have to look down the somebody's shorts to make sure that they have, one pair of genitals or the other. But he was saying that there should be a complete battery of exams that compares men, women, whatever the hell it is, on levels of their hormone, what their hormone levels are, so that everybody is equal from a purely chemical level. So she doesn't want anybody doing any cup checks. But Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's supposed to be the preeminent, astrophysicist of our time, says that we should start doing a battery of examinations so that somebody can go run track and field in high school. They're all stupid. They're all ridiculous. So, again, like I said this morning when this came up in passing, the socio-political force that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represents cannot be negotiated with. It's over. This is the rambling of schizophrenic street performers. Okay? But this is a congressional hearing. That's the scary part. There's no reasoning, there's no peace, and there's definitely not going to be any common ground with these people. There must not be common ground, actually, especially since they've already found their power. They're not going to want to give it up. They're not going to want that power to be modified. They want more, and apparently they believe their delusion more than we believe in reality, because they continue to grow in power and influence. So that's that. I mean, it's going to have to get to a point where some action is going to be taken, because these hearings don't help, and there's no negotiating with this level of psychopathy. I hope everyone understands that too, that I'm not talking about genocide or anything like that, but because these freaks, they project genocide onto other people that they themselves actually they're seeking to subjugate and kill people, no doubt about it. But they need to be shown if we're going to turn this around and not actually have real big problems, they got to be shown no quarter. They got to be kicked out of certain places. It has to be strictly enforced. All their complaints need to be just thrown into the waste paper basket. That's it. Because when they up their game, which they will, they're violent by nature, then whatever. But there's no deterrence in society anymore. There's no deterrence whatsoever. Just keeps going. All right, let's kick this one off. Ladies and gentlemen, I put the links out there across all the Quite Frankly socials. The first hour is going to be everywhere you know, on Rumble, on Rockfin, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, on DLive. And then the second half is going to be on pilled.net, though that link is below. You can also go to quitefrankly.tv. That's been powered by Pilled and Foxhole for years now. It's 2 clicks and you're there. You're definitely going to want to watch as much of this episode as possible with Ben Davidson, because it's going to be a good one. It really is. All right, don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Everybody else shit. Fuck. Everybody else shit. Fuck. Everybody else shit. Fuck. shit. Fuck.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up.
Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back.
Does anybody else want to stay?
Let's ride!
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. That was the pre-show. That was a little bit of a warm-up to get you all nice and cozy in your seats. And now here's the main serving. So here is the little bit of the preface. Not only is Ben Davidson a guy that I've wanted to talk to for a long time because I think his work is very fascinating. If you watch the Sunday night programming that I curate, there's always new space weather news there in those playlists by Ben Davidson, Suspicious Observers. He is the Suspicious Observer. But we've been getting a lot of articles like this recently from Study Finds, but many others. Here's one. Earth news. Earth's magnetic field could completely flip soon. Physicist explains what that means. Now, when you get deeper into this, it talks about the frequency and intensity of these flips, but they're mostly always coming from a standpoint of a magnetic shift in polarity, not an actual flipping or a shifting of the geographical poles. Ben Davidson is a guy who comes from the school of thought that is what we're heading toward. We're heading toward a geographical flipping of the poles, which is a pretty serious thing. And we're going to talk about how that can happen and why it is so serious. Why is it so serious? Well, Ben Davidson, the founder of Space Weather News, the Suspicious Observers channel on YouTube, Ben has become a daily source of information about our native star's cycle of activity and the impact it has on the ancient past, the present, and speculation on the future as well. This is going to take wild twists tonight, ladies and gentlemen, down roads rife with contested science, cataclysm, spiritual rebirth as well. I can't wait to talk to him. Ben, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. We've been following your work for a very, very long time, and man, oh man, I'm ready for a ride tonight. So a lot of people have been seeing you for the first time now, and I really your story is wonderful because you started out as a lawyer, and I wanted to have you just give everybody a little bit of a maybe a nutshell view of how you went from one specialized field to another, where you've built now one of the more recognizable independent brands focusing on space news.
Sure. Well, I did go to law school. I do have my Juris Doctorate, my law degree, but I never actually practiced law. I didn't even take the bar. I figured out pretty quickly during law school that a life of law was not going to be for me. I stuck it out, finished, got the degree, but I went right into interdisciplinary research. It's one of the main things that lawyers do if they aren't lawyers. And luckily, one of the cool things about law school is it's the last place on earth that teaches you how to think and not just regurgitate information that the professor is trying to cram down your throat. It actually teaches you how to think. And so I went into interdisciplinary research for a venture capital firm. Not like many other venture capital firms. These guys aren't sharks or vultures. They try to do some good stuff, so I was happy with it. but it basically forced me to apply economics, the legal aspects of whatever deal they were looking at, and then the subject matter expertise of whatever it is they were looking at. And so what they like to call portfolio diversification for their lead researcher seems like a lack of focus that forces you to basically become an expert in a new topic every 2 weeks. And there I rediscovered my love of science. I had taken many physics courses, many meteorology courses in undergrad. I had initially wanted to be a weatherman, like you see on TV. And so that really kind of slid me back into the idea of bringing together research and information from a lot of different areas. And, you know, they would hire the best experts and consultants in the world, but they would always say different things. And then my boss would turn to me and be like, which one's right? And so it's really kind of putting your feet to the fire and trial by fire, to put it lightly. And so what I do now is really not all that different from what I was trained to do and what I specialized in right after I graduated.
Yeah.
And I was always interested in the sun, weather, earthquakes, science in general. And so, you know, one day I decided, hey, let me do what I do for my bosses, but stuff that interests me. And one day I looked down, there were tens of thousands of people watching. There was professors, NASA scientists in my inbox. And I realized, hey, this is the path I need to take, and I never looked back from that.
You know, and just examining the full corpus of your work and what you put out there, because I know, you know, Suspicious Observers is only even just a fraction of the content you put out. It really does come through that you are living a very, very complete life in that respect. Even in respect to what you forecast some pretty dire things. So in the face of all that, it's really, you give people a lot of confidence going into the future if what you're talking about bears out. And we're going to talk about that right now, because what sets you apart from most others in your line of work is that you're convinced that a pole shift is imminent, and more so lately than I have ever seen before. And I'm sure you have too. We've been seeing these articles talking about the flipping of magnetic poles coming out, and they've been almost like prepping this and massaging this into the public consciousness. But it only comes from the perspective of opposite polarities, and not from the flipping of geographical north and south or the shifting of those poles, which is what you're convinced is coming. So before we get deeper into your work on that, can you say what happens more often over the course of natural history, the magnetic or the geographical shift?
You know, to be perfectly honest with you, I can't find much evidence of them being separated.
Okay.
I realize that one is well recognized, and you know, nobody really denies that it happens. But the geographic, the Earth actually turning over when these magnetic pole shifts occur, nobody really wants to talk about that in any kind of detail, but the evidence really just does suggest that that is exactly what happens. This is from fossilized trees, from sediment records in the Arctic. There are several lines of evidence, even including some that stray off into religious or mythological stories, but specifically the ones where there's no reason for these cultures that are disconnected by, you know, centuries and thousands of miles to tell the exact same story of what happened in their past. And, you know, when we start to put all that together, it really does seem like we're getting half of the truth. And the half of the truth that we're getting, it really is, as you said, kind of being slowly massaged into the mainstream narrative and into the minds of everybody, rather than dumped as perhaps it should be, although maybe that's not for me to decide.
Well, what you just described right there is probably the main reason why that broadcast you did with Jimmy Corsetti was so electric. I mean, because coming from his body of work, what he puts his time into, what you put your time into, there were so many amazing overlapping qualities to that conversation that it really just, I've watched that, I think twice already. And so I have a couple of ideas, the things I want to ask you tonight. They're sort of follow-ups to what you guys had discussed. But here's a little bit of what Business Insider had to say about this recently. And I bring this up because mainstream science reporting, of course, has one position only, that we are in the clear for still many thousands of years to come. And they said this: over the past 150 years, I thought this was pretty significant, the magnetic North Pole has casually wandered 685 miles across Canada. That seems pretty damn significant. Nearly 700 miles? That's like me going from New York to Myrtle Beach. But right now, it's racing 25 miles a year to the northwest. But no one knows when the next flip can happen. The last time the poles reversed was, listen to this number, 780,000 years ago. So it's not like we have a record for this. It turns out 780,000 years is over double the time Earth usually takes between flipping. Do you believe that we're on a 780,000 year cycle?
Nope, absolutely not. And so what they're talking about is a situation where the core fields of the planet reverse and then stay that way for a long time. They call that a full Cron reversal. And the problem is that's not what's happening right now. What's happening is what they refer to as the rapid flips, which are called geomagnetic excursions. And those happen about every 6,000 years. Big ones every 12,000 years, but on the half cycle, at 6,000 years between them, we get a miniature version of it as well. And what's interesting is the ones that they are discussing, they do take thousands of years to unfold. But because of that, it's a much slower, much more gradual change. And it actually appears that there is less of an impact on the species living on this planet because, in the life of any given animal, things just aren't changing that much. But these geomagnetic excursions are different. Not only do they happen about every 12,000 years in a major way, 6,000 years in some way whatsoever. Those ones are really tied to the major extinction events. That's where all of the scientific studies are saying, hey, this is a major problem for ozone levels, for climate, for volcanoes, for direct radiation impact on the surface, because it is a rapid flip of the magnetic poles, all the navigational issues, not just with birds, but mammals and marine creatures, the ones that live in the ocean. There's over 1,000 different animals that use the magnetic field, not only for navigation and migration, but to find feeding grounds, to find mating grounds, things like that. And so you have these navigational issues. You have direct radiation, you have climate changes, volcanoes, and a loss of ozone, creating another radiation problem from ultraviolet light. It is quite the battering that the food chain takes, the biosphere, the living creatures here on Earth. And, I'll say it again, while those other ones do take thousands of years to unfold, the science says that these rapid flips can happen in as little as 80 years. Some of the best scientists on this said, hey, this can happen in a human lifetime. We are already over a century into this event. And so if it were to happen tomorrow, it wouldn't come anywhere near the fastest flip on record. We are in one of the rapid flips right now, and we are progressing quite quickly. And to that point, you had mentioned it's been about a 700-mile trek for the magnetic North Pole. The first half of that took about 150 years. The second half of it has taken place in only the last 20. Things are speeding up.
Oh, really?
In addition to the magnetic poles moving faster, we are losing the magnetic field strength even faster. We lost 10% of Earth's magnetic field, the thing that protects our Earth from energy from space. We lost 10% from about 1850 to the year 2000. Well, in 2010, they upgraded that number to 15%. So wait a minute, in 150 years, we lost 10%, but we lost another 5% in only 10 years. And at the same time, there's a European Space Agency mission to monitor the magnetic field called SWARM. And the mission manager at the time said we had gone from losing 5% of our magnetic field per century to now we're losing 5% per decade. And all the studies suggest that it can get much faster than this, to the point where we can be losing 5 to 10% every year. Once that happens, we're only a couple of years away from the flip, which my math suggests should be in the 2040s, which many people listening to this, you're going to be around for. And if not, your kids, grandkids will be around for. And so this is a very, very serious situation. And it's not only the North Pole, but the South Pole has begun speeding up as well. Over the last 15 years or so, it has begun to accelerate after a much more steady track for several decades. It's now accelerating as well. And so we have accelerating magnetic pole movement. We have accelerating loss of the protective magnetic field of our planet. And it is all leading to this rapid shift, the rapid pole flip, the geomagnetic excursion, which should, if we're, and I'm doing this relatively in a conservative manner, 2040s, if we get some kind of acceleration like we had around the year 2000, it could be the 2030s. I'm not counting on that. There will be plenty of evidence if it happens. But right now, at the state that we're changing, at the rate of change that we are seeing, it's looking like the 2040s is going to be when Earth's magnetic poles flip, and things get very, very interesting and scary here on the Earth.
Well, I have some questions about that in a second, but a couple of follow-ups real quick. When you say the protective, magnetic protective shields here, we're talking about the ozone layer?
So we're talking about the magnetic field. It wraps around the entire planet. And the thing is, the ozone layer is constantly being created and destroyed.
Okay.
Every single day, it is destroyed and recreated to a large degree. The ultraviolet light from the sun actually triggers chemical reactions that build ozone. But the protons and electrons, the stuff that comes out of the sun, when that enters the atmosphere, that destroys ozone. Now, when we lose Earth's magnetic field, the amount of ultraviolet light that we get in from the sun does not change that much, but that magnetic field is what's blocking out most of the protons and electrons. And the extra particles that are actually coming in, rather than the ultraviolet light, will cause an increase in the destruction of the ozone, causing an increase in the ultraviolet light that hits the surface.
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense. And when you start talking about migratory patterns and things like that being thrown off for, what will be considered domestic fauna down here on the Earth, I think about what we've been getting from the news about beached whales.
Exactly.
In that respect, I have to imagine that geoengineering plays a part in it. People have told me, no, dude, wind energy farms, they are very, very adept at throwing off migratory senses and confusing animals. But now you say that sounds like it could also go hand in hand with what's happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, both things are absolutely true. In fact, some of the beached whales on the Atlantic seaboard, those probably have something to do with the wind farms out there. The problem is when you're talking about the beached whales, the sharks in areas where they're not supposed to be, even sea turtles, less than 1% of those events are happening near those wind farms or even the tidal power generation stations. And so I would never sit here and say that those don't affect the animals. It's just that we are seeing a massive uptick worldwide of these events, and less than 1% of them are happening near these man-made structures. A lot of this has to do with the fact that they navigate based on the magnetic field, and the magnetic field is changing.
Okay, so then let's talk about seismic activity here, because you're talking about the magnetic field, protection against the sun's rays. And it's something that I haven't ever considered until recent years watching work from people like yourself. I think about the aurora borealis. I think about other atmospheric conditions and weather, which seem most likely that solar rays and radiation can make an immediate impact. But it took me a long time to consider that the sun can actually affect tectonic plates or volcanic activity. Can you explain how the sun can literally move mountains?
Absolutely. So, if you've ever taken a balloon or even, a piece of plasticware, rubbed it on your head, built up static electricity, then turned on your faucet on a slow drip, and you hold it close, you can bend the water just with a little bit of static electricity. Now, in the ground is mostly water, crystals, iron, and other electromagnetic metals, ores, things like that. These impacts from the sun are global, and they reach all the way down through the mantle into the core. And interestingly enough, as if that knowledge doesn't already make you think, okay, wait a minute, this electromagnetic energy is going all throughout the earth. What's its effect on water, on crystals, on iron? The most conductive points on the planet are the fault zones. They actually seek out the cracks in the earth. And that's where the energy wants to go down. Just like lightning is always seeking ground, the same reason why it's safer to be in a car in a thunderstorm rather than standing outside holding a golf club up in the air. Unlike lightning, what the sun does is it increases the general ambient electricity in the atmosphere. A lot of people don't think about electricity in the atmosphere outside of lightning, but our atmosphere is absolutely electrified. There's, an amazing voltage differential just between your feet and the top of your head. And this energy is constantly going up and down. And when we get hit with this electromagnetic energy from the sun, it actually enhances the up and down energy. And it's not just from the top of the sky down to the ground. It integrates within the crust. And when there's an excess of that energy, it tries to seek ground, or the core, so to speak. And so it will be going down into the ground. And simple experiments you can do in your kitchen with static electricity and water. I have to presume most people understand that electromagnetic forces can affect iron. Even if you don't know that they can affect crystals, I'll just tell you now, they absolutely can. When you charge up a crystal and then discharge it, it can actually translocate. It'll actually move on its own as it's discharging that electric energy. And so this is what's actually happening. This is how the sun is triggering these bigger earthquakes. And it turns out that the bigger earthquakes you look at, the more correlated they are with the sun. If you're looking at magnitude 2, magnitude 3 earthquakes, now, there are still regular geologic processes that can make those. When you start to get above magnitude 6, then you're like, okay, there's now a significant statistical correlation with solar activity. And when you get above magnitude 7, it jumps up in a big way. And when you get above magnitude 8, we're talking about nearly every single magnitude 8 earthquake on record since we have been looking at the sun in this way is correlated with these major events on the sun. And so once you simply understand that, hey, wait a minute, there's this electromagnetic exchange between where that solar energy is coming in and the ground beneath our feet, it's very simple to say, okay, well, wait a minute, that's full of water, crystals, iron. Of course it's going to react to a major electromagnetic surge going through it. I mean, these are the same surges that can take out power grids. They can blow up transformers. They can seriously affect the jet stream. Of course, they're going to have an effect on the water, the crystals, and the iron in the ground.
Now, you're also coming on right now during a time when we have this immense black hole, or this hole in our sun right now. I saw it getting reported on again. That what is it? I had it up over here. That they're saying that the giant hole in the sun is now bigger than 60 Earths and is currently exploding. Now, this is all happening around the same time that earthquake happened in the Philippines. I know that we had a couple of significant volcanic eruptions recently, too. Can you explain, before we go on to something else, because what you had just mentioned there about water, I want to comment on, too, so I don't want to get too far away from it. But can you quickly comment about how, explain how these holes in the sun, these dark spots, are so significant? Because when I see a big black spot in the sun, I say to myself, oh, it must be cooler there. But from what I understand now, this is actually more so acting like a cosmic cannon of some point, and it's just like, it's what the hell's going on here? A
fire hose is probably a better way to think about it.
Okay.
So those protons and electrons I mentioned earlier. The sun is constantly blasting out protons, electrons, plasma away from it in all directions. It's a constant thing. It's been going on for billions of years. It never stops. But that large black area you're talking about is what they call a coronal hole. And these coronal holes have magnetic fields that, instead of arching from one spot to another on the sun, they stream out into space. In fact, they go all the way out past Pluto, and they cause an enhancement of that solar wind. So more protons, more electrons. And so on December 1st, in my morning show, I actually declared an earthquake watch because of that large coronal hole, that large dark spot on the sun. Now, why are these specifically such an impactor of earthquakes? Well, not only do they do the same things that solar flares do, so there's the enhancement of the solar wind. We've got more protons, more electrons. There's more of that electromagnetic energy coming to Earth. But remember what I said a minute ago, the magnetic fields that are coming out of those stretch all the way out past Pluto. We are talking magnetic fields from a star that reach all the way through the solar system. Well, what do you think happens to those magnetic fields when that dark spot is directly facing Earth? Those magnetic fields directly connect to our planet. Those have major impacts on the iron in the ground. Major impacts on iron in the ground. It's basically like a magnet, the power of a star being put directly at the Earth. And so it's no wonder why for the last decade we have been able to predict these upticks in earthquakes and volcanoes based on those exact coronal holes, which is what we did on December 1st. We said, hey, look, for 3 or 4 days, we've got an earthquake watch right now. And of course, the Philippines started shaking tremendously, and it is finally dying down now, thankfully. There were some deaths in the Philippine event, but it's basically the same thing. Whether we're talking about, most people have at least heard the term solar flare. A lot of people who are new to this have not heard the term coronal hole. And while they are different things, they both have a strong electromagnetic impact on the entire planet and everything electromagnetic in it.
So then that brings me to something else. Radiation, and we're talking about the impact of a lot of things, but the impact on human cycles. This is something that you and Jimmy Corsetti had talked about a little bit too, and I had to take a note on this because recently you've been posting a lot about electricity's effect on water. Well, it reminds me of all the stories that I hear from my friends who work in emergency rooms over the years, how cyclical their workload is, and how they could almost base what their worst nights of the year is going to be based on the cycles of the moon. How, people engage in riskier behavior on full moons. More babies are born. And this is where I start to see where the positioning of our stars and planets can really have an impact on human behavior, and how those people who understand the clockwork of that start planning their own events around where the stars are aligned that evening. But whether it's the moon's impact on the tides or the sun's output itself, when you think about the fact that people, you and I, are mostly water, people are essentially a walking ocean on land, and I can see how the sun as well as the moon could be can have a large amount of sway on us as individuals just by the fact that we are, when you run electricity through a small puddle of water and you watch it move, I got to imagine that we respond in similar ways as individuals.
Absolutely, and without question. And it's not just the water. But, everything from neurons firing to a heartbeat to your lungs breathing to processes in individual cells, nearly everything that happens inside our body involves the movement of ions, whether that's magnesium, calcium, sodium, electrolytes. Literally, these electrified particles are responsible for every cellular and organ process inside of our bodies. And so, yeah, we are mostly water. That's going to be affected. Every cellular process we have is electrodynamic. They are going to be affected as well. This is the kind of thing where we're putting together A and B, and neither one is denied. by their respective scientific subfields, but this is where we could really use that old Renaissance type interdisciplinary thinking, tying things together. You know, I can't hate on specialization of science because it's where most of modern day breakthroughs come. However, to be a major scientist in a field right now, you got to live in a box.
Yeah.
You can't be picking your head up and looking around and seeing what everybody else is doing. You have to be laser-like focused on what you're doing and just what you are doing. And then you have to grade papers, grade tests, go to department meetings at your university, hold office hours, teach classes. And so there's a lot going on in addition to the requirement for these scientists to be laser-like focused, that we have really lost this interdisciplinary marrying together of different sciences to see exactly, okay, hey, wait a minute, you're doing this over here, you're doing this over here. What can we learn if we put them together?
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I had professors and NASA scientists in my inbox, as I mentioned earlier, because it became very clear to me that people who study earthquakes do not look at the sun. People who study the sun do not look at the weather, and so on and so forth. And me not having to teach classes, me not having to grade papers or deal with department politics, I could look at all of these things and pull them together, and it became very clear that they weren't looking at these other subjects, because elementary school kids can see, hey, wait a minute, when this happens over here. And they do. I've taught many middle school and elementary school classes on this, where I've simply shown them events that take place, and they get it. Mm-hmm. And some of the questions that the classes ask me are indicative of them understanding exactly what's going on. And so this is kind of I don't know if this is necessarily anyone's fault, rather than just the progression of science into a more and more specified regime, but we have lost that interdisciplinary Renaissance type thinking. And that's where an unbelievable amount of discovery is just waiting for humanity right now. It's just waiting for it.
It goes so far beyond science, though, too. I mean, you can't call up a carpet installation company without having to talk to a thread specialist, and then somebody comes on to talk about it. It's horrible. I don't know what the hell it is. Maybe it's just because there's something very, I don't know, everybody feels good about being a specialist in something, but you lose that holistic understanding of what's going on, when you need a whole team of doctors to talk about one specific patient. It can get a little bit, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. It really is crazy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well,
absolutely.
So then let's talk about the actual flip. Now that we have the basis of how this could be affected and how it would all work, from the sun to the tectonic plates and all that, the how its effect on water, how does this play out? Would it be a 180-degree vertical flip? The south becomes the north. Is it a 90-degree? Does Antarctica end up being at the equator? What do you think?
It is 90 degrees. The reason we know this is because of some key pieces of evidence. And I don't go through all of them here, but I'll give my two favorites. There are some fossilized trees in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, that don't have any rings. And these are from about 12 or 13,000 years ago. Now, there is one place in the world that the trees don't have tree rings, and that's the tropics. The tropics don't have tree rings like that because they don't have those same kind of seasons that produce the tree rings in a place like Canada or Scandinavia. The other thing is a technically still classified bit of material from Project Nanook in the 1940s, which was a project led by Major Maynard White up in the Arctic. And thank goodness he had the foresight to realize that people needed to know this. So he kept a bunch of documents. He kept a bunch of stuff from the Pentagon meetings where the OSS, now the CIA, was involved. And he gave them to his son, Ken White, to publish decades later, which thankfully he did. And basically what they show is when they were looking to, figure out about the North Pole and how it seemed to be moving, even back in the 1940s, they were starting to recognize this. They dug down deep into the sediment. But what they found was after a couple of feet of, muck and polar fossils, there was a layer of tropical fossils and then a layer of polar fossils beneath it. and then a layer of tropical fossils beneath that, and so on and so forth. 9 layers they were able to find. And they determined that these layers would take approximately 12,000 years each to build up. And so how do you get trees with no tree rings in Scandinavia? How do you get alternating layers of polar, tropical fossils in the Arctic? Well, you can answer both of those if the Earth tips 90 degrees and the North and South Pole end up at the equator. And it just so happens that there were actual Pentagon documents, which again, thankfully, Major White kept. I mean, granted, he broke the law, but thank goodness he did. That the OSS, which again eventually morphed into the CIA, the OSS is the Office of Strategic Services. They and the Rand Corporation, along with a couple other government scientists, determined that the Earth flips to 90 degrees, and then the next cycle it'll flip back and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, there's 2 good questions that come along with this. One, the question is, hey, wait a minute, but don't we have evidence of a million-year-old ice in Antarctica? Wouldn't that have melted if it was at the equator? That's the first question. And the second question is, what causes the Earth to actually do this 90-degree tilt and tilt back and tilt and tilt back? So the answer to the first question is actually fairly simple. And there's actually 2 potential answers. So if you don't know about how troubling isotope dating is, it's very troubling. They have absolutely no idea what they're doing in large part. Carbon dating can be way off. My favorite example was they thought that the Tibetan ice caps were more than 500,000 years old. And then they used krypton isotope dating and said, well, wait a minute, I think we have a maximum age of 17,000 years. Jeez. How do you go from more than 500,000 to a maximum age of only 17,000?
Big margin of error.
That's quite the margin of error. And so, one, I don't trust their dating of that ice in Antarctica. But 2, let's just play devil's advocate. Let's just say they're right. And it is a million-year-old ice in Antarctica. There are still glaciers in the tropics today. Right now. Yes, they are melting, but there are glaciers in the tropics today. And the last 12,000 years is what we call an interglacial. It's been warmer than it's been in 100,000 years. In fact, before this last chunk of time, we were in ice age, glacial cycles. So if there's still glaciers in the tropics today during an interglacial warm period, how much of the polar ice is really going to melt, even if you stick it at the equator where those glaciers are now, but the world is 5, 10, 15 degrees colder? The answer is it's just not going to melt in time. And so that's the answer to the first one, and it's fairly simple. It doesn't matter if you choose the isotope dating problems or the glacial, interglacial cycles and looking at the fact that we still have ice at the tropics today. Then we come to the interesting one. What makes the Earth actually turn over like that? Believe it or not, the Earth is trying to do that right now as we speak. When you have something that's spinning, if there's one little point on the spinning ball that is heavier, it weighs more. So let's say you've got a perfect sphere, and then you were to drop, a tiny little magnet on the top of it, just so it sticks to this metal ball that's spinning. One of the basic principles of physics is on a spinning object, the points that have the most weight will want to spin at the point of greatest centrifugal force, which is the equator. The equator is spinning at a higher velocity than the polar regions are because they don't have as far to go. But they all make a turn in the same amount of time, which means that for the equator to do it, it's got to be going much faster, much more centrifugal force. And so whatever part of the world weighs the most wants to be at the equator.
Gotcha.
So right now, that is the polar ice that is stacked on top of the ground and the oceans there. So if it's trying to do that, if it wants to do that, why isn't it doing that? Because Earth is currently locked. The crust and the mantle are actually locked together. You know, in theory, when you look at generally what the crust looks like and generally what the mantle looks like, the plates should be banging around into one another like pieces of plywood on a lake in a windstorm. But that's not what happens, because where the crust and the mantle meet, there's a partial melt layer. It's not like we go rock, 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 and then all of a sudden it's completely liquid rock, in which case it would act like plywood on top of a lake. That interface region is a partial melt, kind of like glue before it dries, or chilled honey. And so it's sort of acting as a sticky thing that is locking them together. But do you remember what I said earlier? This electromagnetic energy from the sun, when it hits the earth, it goes all the way down. And remember what I said earlier about the crust, how the most conductive points are the fault lines, which is where the electricity is going to want to go in. The most conductive layer of the earth is that mantle crust boundary. There are stronger electric currents there than anywhere else. Now, what happens as Earth loses its magnetic field? It loses its protection. That electromagnetic energy from the sun is coming in more and more and more, and amplifying the electric currents, especially at that crust mantle boundary, more and more, to the point where at some stage, this magnetic pole shift is going to let in so much solar energy that it's going to surge such electrical current through that layer that it's going to have significant effects on that rock, or partially melted rock, and it will unlock the crust from the mantle.
They release it from
now,
it.
This is actually something that several scientists, including Albert Einstein, did the math on way back decades ago. They saw the evidence that it happens. They were convinced the Earth turns over, and that's true of Einstein as well. They even knew that you had to unlock the crust from the mantle, but they couldn't figure out how you unlock the crust from the mantle. But they never looked at Earth's changing magnetic field, and they never looked at the sun. They looked at everything from great earthquakes to huge volcanic eruptions. That didn't work because they would be isolated and you couldn't unlock the entire crust at one time. They were thinking, okay, well, what if you just dumped so much ice and snow at the polar regions that it just weighed so much it broke the crust free? They figured out even if you were to evaporate all the water in the oceans and dump it as ice on the polar regions, that wouldn't be enough. There had to be something, and that's where, unfortunately, most of those scientists died without ever coming to an actual answer. The answer has come in the decades since then, since we've been able to classify that crust mantle boundary as being exceptionally conductive, since we've been able to monitor the electrical activity and say, hey, wait a minute, the sun has these electrical impacts all the way down through the ground. So now we couple this with the evidence in the tree rings in the Arctic, plus about 3 dozen other things I didn't mention because I don't want to take up all time just discussing evidence. So we know that the Earth turns over. We have that evidence. They were convinced of it back then as well. We know how the sun impacts the layer that must be unlocked to account for the evidence. And it just so happens the sun will have the perfect opportunity to do that when Earth's protective magnetic field is weaker. And about the only conclusion that Einstein and those other scientists made all those decades ago was that the Earth flip happens when the magnetic flip happens. And so everything lines up absolutely perfectly. It's the only way to explain the evidence.
It's
is that okay?
Yeah. Well, the way that you've put it together for people, it's very easy to digest, and there definitely is a logical string that goes throughout all of it. Now, obviously, I'm in a position where I don't know all the questions, the follow-up questions to ask, but still, it's very compelling stuff, and it's also pretty frightening. First of all, I'm in New York, so we would pass through the equator and probably end up somewhere. We would be the new South America at some point. But you know, when you think about that 90 degrees coming on down, and the poles are now at the equator, I have to imagine that is the real issue. Is the melting of the ice? Are we looking at a water world, Kevin Costner situation, or what is the real big? What is the death blow to mankind when this happens? Because it's not just that. Oh,
Tsunamis.
What's that? Tsunamis.
Tsunami. Because think about it, the crust is shifted, but the oceans are not attached to the crust. They're just shifting there. And so basically what you're going to have is the oceans continuing their inertia and the crust moving. So we're going to have titanic tsunamis, both as the crust moves in one direction and then when it stops from the sloshing back of the waters. And so a place like New York City, at some point, will likely be several hundred feet under the ocean.
Now I know why you are you're in the mountains right now.
Yep.
I guess that's a whole. Did you grow up there, or is this like Cleon Skousen kind of?
I'm from Pittsburgh.
Okay.
I'm from Steeler. But it became readily apparent, and here's the other thing you can notice: we can look back and see that there were several civilizations that managed to survive the last one, and in fact, we're still here talking. Humans have survived this every single time it's happened. It hasn't wiped us out yet. But specifically looking back at the last one, all the cultures that survived, they were not living near an ocean. They were living in high elevation, and they had a way to hide underground. Whether you're looking at the cave dwellings, which aren't too far away from me here in Colorado, or you're looking at those underground cities in Turkey or other places of the world, these are areas where there is evidence of humans actually making it through the last cycle. And obviously with the tsunamis I just mentioned, that's why you don't want to be near the ocean. There's evidence that some of these tsunamis can cross continents, which is why you want to be at as high an elevation as humanly possible. But also, when this is happening, there's going to be some pretty unbelievable weather going on, from wind to hail to lightning. Basically the worst weather you could imagine for several days and weeks after this flip, as the Earth is basically reorganizing itself. There's going to be a need to hide underground. And so it's the three things that all the surviving civilizations from the last one have in common: away from oceans, high elevation, and a way to hide underground. And the underground thing, it doesn't have to be some mild, deep bunker. In fact, you wouldn't want to be too deep, because who knows what's going to happen. There should be great earthquakes worldwide when the world goes like this. Massive magma movement. You don't want to be that deep underground. Something like a root cellar would work.
Well, I saw that, what's his name? Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy with the FTX stuff. With there's this new thing that's going around that he and his friends were actually thinking about building themselves a nice little bunker community on a privately owned island. And I'm saying to myself, how connected is this guy? Is this just a slightly autistic crypto dealer that just doesn't know what to do all of the billions that he thought would always be, flowing in? Or did his mentors and elder statesmen in his family say, we're going to have a situation in a couple of decades?
Well, there's tons of examples. Kim Kardashian actually got in trouble with her local county because she broke some regulations when she was building her doomsday bunker. The $1 million bunker business, it is exploding right now among celebrities, CEOs, etc. But my favorite examples are two of the richest men in the world. So let's take Jeff Bezos first. Most people have heard that he's putting this huge clock inside of a mountain. It's a front. I know locals there. I've talked to people who know law enforcement there. There are cement trucks constantly coming in and out of that place. There are armed security. There is other kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with the clock. And this mountain that he is hollowing out sits across the street from his Blue Origin launch facility. Now, granted, Blue Origin isn't exactly SpaceX or NASA, but literally Jeff Bezos is making it so he can go up or he can go down into the mountain. What's Elon Musk doing? Obviously, everyone knows about SpaceX. Do you know about his boring company? He's digging tunnels everywhere. He can go up. He can go down. The same for Richard Branson. He's got several bunkers in different locations. And, Virgin Galactic, he's trying to get up to the top of the sky and into space as well. This is something that all the, quote, elites are doing and making ready for themselves. And, don't listen to what they say. Just watch what they do.
It's a good point. That's a great point.
That'll tell you what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. So listen, I would love to hold you over on the other side of intermission for a little while longer. I've got a bunch of things I want to still ask you. I don't want to take up too much of your time, though. But is that okay with you? A minute and a half break?
Yeah, I want to go get a glass of water. I'll be right back.
Sounds great. Everybody, listen, Ben Davidson's going to be back with me in just a second. We are going to go and flip over to pilled.net. That link is in the description of wherever the hell you're watching right now. I tweeted them all out there. You can click right through to the Pilled, the direct link on Pilled, or, as always, quitefrankly.tv. It is 2 clicks. It is 1 click over to the new site, to my sites. That's been the way it's been for years now, and the second click to press play. There's no paywall, nothing like that. I've got so much more. I know that Ben has had a lot of people from NASA I want to have some NASA questions. I know that there's some flat earthers out there that are having a good time right now. So that going on, and we can talk about that after, take some calls or whatever. But I have a lot of great things to still do, and I want you all to be there with us. So here we go. We're flipping over. I will see you on the other side.
It's treason, then.
It's intermission time, folks. Time out to
Press the like button. Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to intermission.
We'll be right back.